Welcome to Midlife Matters. I'm Marie, and each week I'm joined by my friends Julie and Mindy to talk about all the topics keeping women in the middle years up at night. COVID has made this school year crazy, and you can't talk to moms of school-age children without hearing about how it's changed so much in their family life. And with everything so up in the air, some of us are considering options we've never considered before, including something that seems way more possible in today's environment, road schooling. That's right, we're going to be talking to a friend who went on a great big adventure and is here to share the details with us. Listeners, have you ever fantasized about leaving your house and hitting the road in an RV? Are you fascinated by those stories of families living and working while seeing new and interesting places? Today we're talking with Kathy Armstrong, who did just that. And Kathy is a personal friend of Julie's. And so, Julie, I'm going to let you introduce Kathy and give a little synopsis of what we're going to be talking about today.
Kathy is actually the sister-in-law of my good friend Janet, who we heard from on our Moving in Midlife episode, if you remember that.
Oh, yes.
I was just fascinated by her story because I got to hear a little bit of it through Janet. This past year, she hit the road with her teenage son, high school age, homeschooled on the road. And I just heard all about all the fascinating places they saw, primarily Southeast and East Coast. You know, got to count that as a year of school and not so traditional. It was a living education.
That's amazing. And it was just you and your son, Kathy?
Well, we have our sister-in-law, my sister-in-law, Janet, and she came for the majority of the trip with us.
Oh, okay.
2 midlife women and a teenage son. Every teenage boy's dream.
Oh, I'm sure that...
Yeah, to be in a 17-foot living space with 2 menopausal women.
Wow. Well, he gets a gold medal. That was an education in and of itself.
Yes.
Well, Kathy, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? Is your son your only child?
I'm married to Rex. We've been married for 25 years, and we have 3 boys, one in grad school, one in college, and one who's a junior in high school. And we have homeschooled them all the way through. Well, I guess when my oldest was in first grade, he was in a traditional school, and then we decided to homeschool from there on out. So,
okay, so you're pretty much a homeschool expert by now.
Every year's different.
That's right.
What made you want to try road schooling? Was that something you'd always wanted to do even when you had all 3 at home and now you finally had the chance when you only had 1, or was it a new idea?
It kind of evolved throughout the years. Our type of homeschooling that we do is with boys is very experiential. It's always been hands-on. We just found that's the best way for boys to learn.
Mm-hmm.
So early on when they were younger, we started taking educational field trips. So we would go to Williamsburg for a week or 2. We would go to different museums, labs, all sorts of things. And so that we love to camp. The boys love to camp. That's part of our family DNA, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So we had always talked about, wouldn't it be so wonderful if we could road school?
Yeah.
But then there's this little pesky detail about my husband has a job
Mm-hmm.
that he has to work at every day. So it just dawned on me that if we were going to do that this last year, that was my last year to do it. Because once the boys get in a junior in high school, that's when they start doing dual enrollment and things like that, that we are tied to a schedule. And so we can't, you just can't pick up and leave.
Sure.
So Weston was a sophomore, and he was my last one at home. We already had one in college. And so I just thought, if we're going to do it, now is the time. We have to do it now. So that's kind of how it all got started. And then one day, Janet, I was telling her about what we're going to do. And she was like, oh my goodness, I want to come, because she's an empty nester. And so she joined the trip, and she was our English tutor, our ACT prepper, and our did a lot of writing projects with Weston. So she was a real joy to have on the trip. So,
wow,
how
that's really
great
cool
to have a built-in family member teacher.
Yes.
Well, Kathy, I know you're a planner. you plan things really, really well. So I'm curious as to how did you plan everything out to the nth detail, or did you just kind of leave it open ended? And also, how much was your son on board with all of this?
That's a great question. When I started talking about this, he was excited about the trip in general because he does like to travel and do all those things. But to be honest, the closer we got to it, he was a little more apprehensive than I realized about being away from his friends as long as, once that started to dawn on him, how many months that we were going to be gone. So that was an area that we had to navigate. So in our planning of the trip, I purposefully planned the timing of things so that Rex could come and visit. Greg was coming to visit. We were going to be visiting family members. At one point, we were going to be on a tour with other homeschool families. So about every week and a half, I tried to plan something. He was going to have interaction with people his own age. So that was, the closer it got, it just became very apparent that I was really going to have to take that as in consideration, which we weren't necessarily aware of because we've never been gone that long. So we did plan that into the trip. As far as the bulk of the trip, we were studying American history. So I looked through our course that we were going to be talking about. And so I picked out people, places, presidential homes, battlefields, all those things that would tie together that we could incorporate all of that into our learning so that we could basically skip entire sections in our history book because we were there and taking tours and learning and visiting and all of that. So we set out a course. I knew that we had to get to a certain point at a certain time of the year and up north before, so we could come back down. So we had a few timing issues and things, but really we just, prayed about all of this. And it was very interesting about all the interconnections that we were making that there's no way we could have planned for any of that. So we planned enough to be prepared, but left enough wiggle room where God was able to move and direct our steps and to certain people and certain places and tours and just so many things that lined up that it was really, really cool to see. But we did plan from the beginning, places to stay, where we were going to go. I had a list of things that were possible activities for us to do with the information there. So if we got there and found something else, then we could do that instead. But we did have a pretty fleshed out plan that still left room for options. So.
Did he have a lot of things he wanted to see, or did he just kind of leave that up to you?
Well, of course, he loves battlefields, so he wanted to see those. And the other thing was he was studying marine biology at that year, and so I looked up every aquarium that we could along the road, and we made special trips to aquariums like the National Aquarium in Baltimore, which was fantastic. There was one right across the border in Ohio, which was wonderful, in Newport. So I asked him specifically, what are things that you want to do? What do you want to learn? What do you want to see? And he wanted to hike, and he wanted to go to the aquariums, and he wanted to go to battlefield. So those were things that we automatically incorporated whenever possible.
This is fascinating. And I feel like there's probably a million things to do when you look at our country and the things that you can go see and experience. And so I'm just curious how you decided on a plan of action. You sound like a fabulous planner, even leaving wiggle room in your schedule. But the communication with your son, but also how did you go about it? Did your love of travel and the things you wanted to see influence what then you educated him on? Or did what he needed to learn that year kind of pick your route?
Really, what we did for this was start with his education. I wanted it to count for his American history. So we picked out places specific toward that, whether it was Revolutionary history, Civil War history, important people, presidents. We chose those things specifically, which means we had to say no to some other cool things that's, you could just stay on the road and never come home. There's so many things to see and learn and do. And we tried to stay at state parks because they're generally got great hiking and they're beautiful and you've got more space between campers staying at state parks. So our goal was to stay at state parks versus some more of the resort type RV parks and things. So, and we always we did have some rules. We would never travel at night because we were towing by ourselves. So we would always travel in the morning and try to be somewhere by noon. We generally didn't travel more than 3 hours. And then we always tried to stay over a weekend so we could attend a local church on a Sunday so we could get just a flair and a feeling for how God was working in all these different areas and communities that we were going to. And that was really cool. And then, so we always stayed over a weekend and we always pulled out somewhere on a Monday. So generally we averaged about 3 to 4 days in one place.
Okay.
That's nice. It gives you time to rest.
Yeah. And we tried to stay in a local place so that we could take 45-minute or an hour or 30-minute day trip. So we weren't always packing and unpacking. And that is very wearisome when you're on the road for a long time. So we tried to go in one place and then do all of our day trips over there. And then we always planned at least 1 or 2 days where we could do a real school day, like we had to catch up on math. We couldn't always just do fun stuff. We had to do some of the nuts and bolts of, your sophomore year. So we couldn't take everything off.
Right.
But that's just kind of those were some of the rules that we placed on ourselves so that we felt like we were safe in a safe place, could make the most of the time when we were there.
Kathy, tell us a little bit about where you actually went. I know you said state parks, but give us some specific.
Well, we started the trip, this portion of the trip, Janet wasn't there, but we started the school year off in our homeschool association. We planned a field trip down to the Gulf Coast Research Lab in Ocean Springs, Mississippi. So we spent a week down there. We did classwork. They did labs. They went out on a research vessel. And so that was part of our marine biology kickoff. So that was really cool. And so then we came back home, regrouped, picked up Janet, and then we headed off to Bardstown, Kentucky. And we saw things like Stephen Foster's home, Abraham Lincoln's birthplace, and Shaker Village, a lot of those kinds of things. And then we moved on up to North Kentucky, and Big Bone Lick State Park was where we stopped. And we saw some really neat things there, just over in Cincinnati, Ohio, the Harriet Beecher Stowe house. And of course, we were reading Uncle Tom's Cabin at the time by campfire at night. So that was fun. I don't think we made it through the whole book yet, but we read large portions of it. And then we learned about her family, her father. That was really cool. And then we went to the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center, which was an amazing place, very moving. Like we thought we would spend a couple hours there, and we were there all day and could have gone back. Mm-hmm. It was very unbelievable. And then that's another place where we went to a really wonderful Newport aquarium. And then we went to Fort Boonesborough State Park, where we did some hiking, went to Daniel Boone's fort. There was lots of things there that we did, lots of great hiking. Then we moved into West Virginia, and then that's where we saw some family. So that was really fun and a good break. We got to go inside and sleep on a real bed in a real house.
I bet that feels so great.
That was kind of fun. And we went to Virginia, saw Monticello and James Madison's home, and went back through West Virginia, which I personally had never been to West Virginia, and it was absolutely beautiful. It's just breathtaking. It was unbelievable. We went to Harper's Ferry, Antietam. We went to Gettysburg, which was Weston's favorite part, actually. The Eisenhower home. We went to a tavern there that was built in 1776. And it's one of the only taverns in that area that has local Revolutionary War history as well as Civil War history, with Gettysburg being fought there. So that was fascinating. And then we went up to Hershey, Pennsylvania, which was a very fun place. How that actually made the list was we read the biography of Milton Hershey and was just so intrigued with his life, his vision, just what he did and what he created, and just his life was very inspiring. So we wanted to go and see that, and that did not disappoint. That was amazing. Another wonderful thing, I had read a tip somewhere about visiting state capitals and how you can learn a lot of information about the area. So we went to the Pennsylvania state capitol, which was unbelievable. The amount of information they had there, the depth of their spiritual heritage that's printed all over the walls from William Penn, and it was just amazing. So that was really cool. But anyway, then we hooked up with a tour company in Philadelphia, which was kind of the backbone of the trip. I wanted to take Weston on that. And then we kind of backed out from there. So we could be at a certain place in Pennsylvania in October to be able to be a part of this trip. And so through that trip, they're a company that does Christian historical worldview tours. And so we took a tour through Philadelphia, Valley Forge, Trenton, Brandywine. It was just really amazing. So that's another place where he met several friends he still keeps in touch with even. So that was a blessing. And then we rounded the corner, came down through Delaware and Maryland and did the National Aquarium. And by that time, Rex had met up with us. And then we actually had to cut the trip short a little bit because we had a meeting that came up that we couldn't miss back home. So.
And how many months are you into it at that point, Kathy? How many months have you been gone seeing all that?
Well, in total, it was about 2.5.
Okay, so you saw a lot in 2.5 months. My goodness.
Yeah. That's the neat part about homeschooling is you have the freedom to tailor it, to your individual family needs and individual children even,
Yes.
getting to focus on those things that he really wanted to see and battlefields. And I remember hearing specifically about the Hershey part of the story. Janet really, really loved that part of his life.
It was really interesting. And in his museum that talks about his life and just how innovative he was, the leadership skills that he had and how he empowered his employees to come up with solutions and gave them the reins to just problem solve and make things happen. And so they had a lot of those things where their employees turned bathtubs into wheelbarrows and just all sorts of things. But I guess our favorite conversation from that tour in Hershey was he had an employee that lived in his town that he built, and he was living there and working at Hershey, and he had this great idea for a new candy. And so he asked Milton about it, and he said, sure, go ahead and create it. So he would work at Hershey during the day, and at night in his basement, he would create a new candy and sell it like a direct competition to Milton.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
Yes. And do you know what that new candy was? No. Reese's peanut butter cups.
No.
I guess so. I know. So by the time that he went on and they created a whole company and, how successful that was. But when he died or passed away, then he gave the rights back to the Hershey Corporation for Reese's Peanuts. So it was just, things like that. That was the kind of man that Milton Hershey was. And he was successful when those around him were being successful. And, what a great lesson that you want to teach your child. So, so we love that.
Yeah, I love that you're not necessarily hitting all these major highlights that everybody typically thinks of on an American history tour. But yet those are the stories of the real American people that made America. Like that's, I find those stories more interesting sometimes than the big ones.
Well, and that a lot of people tried to copy what Milton Hershey did in other parts of the country, and all of them failed. None of them. And Milton Hershey's in his school, it is still thriving. now to this day because of the man of character that he was and what he tried to do. He was doing it for his people, not to make a buck. And his legacy still stands today. So, that was just one of our fun lessons that we learned when we were eating a milkshake flight in Hershey's.
Oh, yum.
Yum.
All right, Kathy. What were some of the best memories of your time on the road with your son?
Oh, that's a hard question. It's a hard question just to choose one because I personally loved it all. I loved having the freedom to stop at whatever we wanted to do. If we saw one day when Wes and I were by ourselves, we saw a sign on the road for an apple festival. So we just pulled off and went in. And so one of our little favorite memories from that was they had this apple cider donut milkshake.
Oh my goodness.
That sounds really good.
It was a homemade donut made with their fresh apple cider from their orchard. Of course, we were in the fall in Pennsylvania at the time, so it was wonderful. But I asked Weston last night what were some of his favorite memories. And I know you won't be surprised that a 16-year-old boy listed off a ton of food that he ate.
Ooh, let's hear it. I was going to ask you about the food, Kathy. Like, how did you do that? So I'm interested to hear.
Yes, well, we tried to save down on costs because let's face it, feeding a 15-year-old boy is very expensive. So we would always eat breakfast at the camper, and we would usually try to eat another meal at the camper. So we were only eating one meal out. And we like to do local restaurants. So a lot of the taverns, the historic taverns that we went to, served wonderful food, the local flair, like the donut. There was a hot, the famous Kentucky hot brown sandwich. He tried that. And somewhere else in Pennsylvania, every time we drove past, there was a little food truck on the side of the road. And there were always just so many cars stacked up. And we're like, well, this has got to be good if all the locals are coming here. And it was out in the middle of nowhere. So we stopped, and it was these homemade pretzels. And of course, they told us the whole, pretzel story in Hanover, Pennsylvania. But they were just unlike any pretzel I've ever eaten in my entire life. And so that was delicious. So there were just so many local places that we would just stop and ask somebody, what's the best place to eat in town? And so we just asked the locals, they gave us recommendations. So that's usually how we found our places that we wanted to eat. But we did a lot of eating in the camper. Sometimes you're just too tired. You don't want to go out. Or if we knew we were going to, like the day we went to Monticello, we knew we would stay there all day. So we just packed a lunch and ate out in the parking lot and then went back in and finished the tour. So we wanted to be able to enable ourselves to see as much as we could. So
yeah, eating has always been the highlight of my travel experiences. So
yes, definitely.
I am curious, Kathy, how your husband was able to kind of stay involved. You guys as a family unit with you and your son going out, like how often did you plan to meet up? And it sounds like you were gone. You said like 2.5 months essentially, but yeah, how did you work that out? Like just, your marriage relationship and, father-son relationship and just, that sort of thing.
Well, when I was kind of thinking about this and making plans, I asked Rex, I said, so this is kind of what I'm thinking. Like, what do you think about that? And he's like, well, I think you just said you're leaving me for 3 months.
Right.
I was like, well, not really. The very first week, he was able to go with us to Ocean Springs and be a part of that. So he was with us for that. And then we knew we did not want to be separated as a family for that long. So we planned specific times that we were still close enough before we got too far for him to be able to just drive up for a long weekend. So he came and did that with us in Kentucky. And then he flew out to Maryland and then on a one-way ticket, and then we picked him up and brought him back home. So we saw him twice. Uncle Greg came and met us once so that we would see family. And then, of course, we had a lot of Zoom math meetings with Dad on the road when we got stuck in our Algebra 2 class. So we did reconnect like that as well. So, and before we left, I knew that Rex, we had a child who was leaving to college, so he was going to be by himself. So short times of him by himself is great that he gets to get caught up on work. And so he'll stay at work later than normally would if we were at home. So a couple months before we left, I started freezing some individual meals for him so that it just made it easy for him. If he was going to work hard for us to go on a trip like this, I wanted to make things as easy as possible for him. So, and just leave him some little notes in the freezer and just let him know that they were, loved and appreciated, and that just reminding him how much I appreciated that he was letting us do this. So he got to come out and do some fun things. And so we enjoyed having him when he could come out.
So how expensive is a trip like this? Because it sounds so awesome, Kathy. And I'm assuming that you guys already owned an RV and all that. But if someone was thinking about it, is it just cost prohibitive, or do you feel like it's pretty doable?
Well, there are doable ways to make it happen. Like with everything, I don't have an unlimited money tree that I can pull from, which would be nice. But interesting about that, when Janet and I first started talking about this, she had a small camper. And so we were just going to be tandem. She was going to pull her camper. I was going to pull mine, until we started putting some numbers to that. Because you don't get really great gas mileage when you're towing anything. So we started just, how many miles were we going? And if you do an average of, 250, per gallon, how many gallons were just the sheer number of gallons it was going to take. In total, we drove over 5,000 miles.
Wow.
So we very quickly decided we would be traveling in the same camper.
Wow.
One truck, one camper. We did do a little bit of cost analysis, I guess. My husband started running those numbers first before he said we would go, and just figuring out what was going to be your gas costs, how much were you going to stay on the road, because even with state parks, you can stay in a $20 place a night to camp, or you can stay in a $65 a night place to camp. So control some of the costs you have control over, but not all of them. Food cost was one that you can control. Gas cost is you can't. You don't have any way to do that. So how we handle that was normally live on a budget anyway. So the food budget at home, Rex wasn't going to be using that, so we diverted that to the trip. So there were several things in the budget, the entertainment, rec, clothing, whatever. We would divert some of that money to we called it the Great Expotition, from Winnie the Pooh quote. But the expotition, so we diverted some of those funds. I had a couple little part-time jobs that I was doing, and I started socking all of that money into its own account. So we just opened up a specific expotition account and reserved all those funds there. So we knew how much that we had and how much that we, so how we needed to allocate that. So we always gave preference to museum fees and aquarium fees and things like that. And then if we needed to make up some money on that, then we would just eat more meals at home and not eat the meals out. Or we would eat at lunch when it's cheaper than you would eat at night. So we tried to make up things like that. So we reserved our money for the things that we really, really wanted to do.
Yeah. Well, that's neat.
Well, Kathy, I think I know the answer to this question, but would you do it all again? And if so, would anything look differently next time?
I would do it tomorrow. I absolutely loved it. And sometimes I get very sad that I'm not looking for a trip at the moment. But yes, I would definitely do it again. We had plans to go some places in the spring as well, but of course COVID hit, so we weren't able to go and leave and do any of those things. But we ended up going out again, just Weston and I, in February following that fall, and did some more president's homes and things on the way home from a family wedding. So yes, I would definitely do it. And every trip is different, and you have to, again, some of the smart things we did was planning some margin into your day. It's not fun to go on those trips and it's different than if you go somewhere for a week. When you go somewhere for a week and you can stack those days with lots of things and lots of activities because you're coming back home, but you can't live like that on the road. It's very exhausting to do that. So, planning some margin was very helpful to do. But I would definitely do it. I don't know what I would change. I've asked Weston, would you go out with me again? And he said, yeah, I would. And he told me, Mom, I did not appreciate what that trip was all the time when I was on it. He said, but I am so very thankful that we did that. And I really did enjoy it. But there was a lot of adjustment there those first couple weeks. It's a small space and you're all living together and you're, figuring out, who can go to the bathroom first or whatever. But it was fun, and everybody settled into their little routines and things that they did that were help, whether they were the ones who washed the dishes or whether they were the ones who cleaned up, or so we all had so we got it down where we could pack up very quickly if we needed to. And so it was fun. I would definitely go again.
Yeah.
I'm sure Janet would go with you.
Oh, yeah, she would. In fact, I told her that's your motivation for getting over knee surgery, because I've got another trip brewing and we've got to go and you got to be healthy.
You got to be able to do those hikes.
I do have another question. Was there any special way that you documented your trip, either through photo books then, or journaling, or?
I did. Weston didn't really, do that, but I tried to document each night or every other day in a journal what we did or what we learned, or someone that we met, or a providential conversation or something like that. Of course, we did document with photos and on Facebook for our family and our friends who were following us and wanted to keep up with where we were. And of course, we never posted that day where we were, just as a safety reason. We would always wait a couple days and then post something just so. And I kept all the paper from all the different places that we went. And so my goal is to make a scrapbook out of that, but I've not done that yet. But I tried to write all those things down so I could remember what we were thinking and feeling, and funny inside jokes and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So that when I go back to make that, I will have all of that information, because you think you won't forget. It's like, it was so amazing. We won't forget anything.
But
and
you
then
do.
How quickly.
Yeah, that's such a treasure to have that. Yeah.
So,
that's awesome. Well, what advice do you have for a family looking into giving this a try? What things would you say that they should think about? Now, you only had one child with you. What if they have multiple kids, or what if they have different ages? Do you have any advice for people?
That's a great question. If you have more than one kid, you'll definitely need more than 17 feet to live in.
I'm trying to even think of what would 17 feet look like?
Well, now 17 feet, I guess, was our inside living space. And you have a narrow set of bunk beds. So it's much more narrow than a normal bunk would be, a twin size bed. And then we had, right when you walked in, there was a queen bed that was turned sideways. So there's, you can't walk around it. So you had walls on so you had the bed, and then you had your table, and then you had the bunk beds. So Janet and I would switch off who got to sleep on the bottom bunk. So every week we would rotate. So somebody got the big bed and then someone got the bunk bed. So that was kind of fun. For multiple kids, That's another reason why we really love state parks is your outdoor space. With a camper that small, we weren't living in that camper. We were sleeping in the camper. We prepared meals outside. We ate outside. The weather was wonderful most of the time. So we just lived outside because we all love to be outside. But of course, the larger camper that you have, the more it's going to cost to tow. There's lots of issues in going larger. So for multiple kids, but everybody does need their own space. They need their own place that is theirs. Even if it's not very big, they still need something that's theirs. That it's very hard to find private space when you're in a small camper like that. So you have to make accommodations for that, and you have to remember. So if someone starts to get, grumpy or something, then, just recognize that, make accommodations for it, let them go out and ride their bike. We did take our bikes, and that was when he started to get a little grumpy, like, when are we going home? He would just get on his bike and he would ride for, an hour or so and come back and, he was refreshed. So there is a very real aspect to all living together in a very small space. And you just have to be aware of. I was aware of it, but I didn't realize the depth of impact that was going to be. So you do need to be mindful of that.
Mm-hmm. How many hours a day would you say that you spent on like actual book learning versus going out and doing things?
Oh, not very much. A couple hours a day, maybe. And we would try to, instead of doing work at the camper or something, we would try to go into town because we discovered early on they have the cutest public libraries.
Oh, yeah.
They're a lot of times they're in historic buildings or they're right next to a historic building. And it was just, so we started looking up where all the public libraries were. So we started going there to do some of our homework, online work, things like that. So we try to do that a couple hours a day, or if we missed a couple days, and we would just have one big catch-up day where we would go. We were in a little historic library I think it was in York, Pennsylvania. And I looked across the street. I was like, there's a college over there. Isn't it beautiful? Wouldn't it be beautiful to go to college? So I just looked it up real quick and I'm like, oh my goodness, that's the college that Benjamin Rush founded. We are sitting right here. So of course we left the library and went over there and took a tour.
Wow.
And so, you don't even know sometimes that you're sitting right there in a jewel. And but anyway, so we tried to do that because then it felt like if you're at the campground trying to do schoolwork, you just stare outside at nature. It's so beautiful, So sometimes to put the blinders in focus, we would go into the library and just pretend like we were doing school.
Yeah. Well, I have to say that your trip sounds awesome. I mean, I think it's something that just about anyone would enjoy at just about any age, especially, even kids that are in the elementary grades, they're learning those history things, and to have them come alive right before their very eyes. And then, of course, in middle and high school, you can understand it so much better. And it probably generated such great conversations. And I think it sounds so cool. Thank you for coming on and sharing with us.
Yeah,
Well,
thank you.
Thanks,
I really
Kathy.
enjoyed it.
It's inspiring.
Will you let us post some of your pictures on Instagram this week?
Sure. That'd be great.
Yeah. Listeners, if you would like to come on Instagram and see some of the pictures of Kathy's travel, come and follow us at Midlife Matters Podcast on Instagram. We would love to hear from any listeners that have also tried RVing with their family and what your experiences were like. Feel free to contact us on Instagram or email us at midlifematterspodcast@gmail.com. But before we go, Kathy, we always do I'm a Fan. What are you a fan of, Kathy?
Besides camping, I really love listening to podcasts as I'm doing work around the house. And one of my favorites that I'm listening to right now is a John Stone Street podcast through Breakpoint. And it's just it's not really a political analysis, but it's more of a worldview, Christian worldview of what's going on in the world and how we can be a part of the solution.
I'll have to put a link to that in our show notes. Thanks for sharing. Julie, what are you a fan of this week?
We started watching a show on PBS Masterpiece that I was really excited about, and it is All Creatures Great and Small by James Herriot. Have you ever read the books?
I've heard of them.
They're very old, and it's about James Herriot, who's a veterinarian.
Oh, okay.
They made a series in the 70s, and then they've remade it. So it's currently on PBS, so you have to wait, each Sunday night to watch it. But on Prime, they do keep... there's 3 episodes now, so you can watch the first 3.
Is it a drama?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
I'll have to check that
out. And it's set in the beautiful countryside of England, so I love it.
Oh, that's wonderful. It's so funny how you can know and be familiar with a title, but I've never actually read it or seen the show, so I'll have to check that out.
Yeah.
Mindy, what are you a fan of this week?
Well, I was walking this past week and I looked down, and lo and behold, there's this super cute pink scrunchie on the ground. And typically I do not pick up anything hair related if I find it on the ground.
That's
However,
true.
this day I was inspired and I was like, hey, that's kind of cute. And I picked it up and I brought it home and I washed it. Very good. And I absolutely love my new pink scrunchie because I don't know if you guys deal with this, but when you put your hair in a ponytail, I use those like corkscrew plastic hair bands now because they don't pull my hair. Well, so this scrunchie has that inside, and then it's this pink like velour outside of the corkscrew thing. And so it's like,
oh, that looks adorable.
Super cute. And I found it on the ground. Okay, so I am going to be purchasing more colors now, but the name of it is Invisibobble.
So yeah, I was wondering if you happened to find it online so you could get more.
So I'm all about finding just the right thing to put my hair in a ponytail because it's in a ponytail almost every day.
Oh, that's really cool. Well, this week I'm a fan of something that I did find at Aldi, and I have been finding something new just about every week at Aldi. We just got a new one, I don't know, a few months ago. But my daughter is sensitive to soy, and so any pre-made frozen meatballs are out. And I do not want to make my own meatballs. They never turn out as well. I don't know. They don't stay together. Mine always end up being like just large chunks of ground beef. Have you guys run into that?
No, I'm too lazy to make my own. It's not that I'm worried about them falling apart. I just don't want to do it.
Well, anyways, in their fresh food section, Aldi has, these are not frozen. They are ready to be cooked, though, Italian-style meatballs, and they do not have soy. And so what I did was just kind of brown them in the skillet, and then I put them in the sauce, and they were delicious. My son is always begging me for meatballs, and I tell him, well, Lauren's not going to be able to eat them, but he was so thrilled that I brought these home, and we all enjoyed them.
It sounds delicious.
I don't think I've ever made meatballs either. I like frozen ones, yeah. So those sound even better if they're fresh.
You just made me feel so much better. Thank you.
I'm sure Kathy makes her own.
Kathy, do you?
No, I've made them once, and they're a lot of work. And I'm like, well, why am I doing this? They're really wonderful frozen at Costco. So
yes,
sister, love it.
That's what I would normally like to buy is just the gigantic bag at Costco. But right now, I'll for sure buy these Aldi meatballs again. All right, ladies, it was so great talking with you. I am inspired to maybe think about trips now, maybe not in an RV, but just somewhere, Kathy, because it sounds like you saw and did so many interesting things.
it was awesome. I highly encourage. It's a great family thing. It's a great bonding, and you just learn so much that you can't learn from a book because you just experience it, and the kids remember that, and it makes an impact on them.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. And your scrapbook is going to be such a treasure someday for you and your son to look back on.
That's what I should have been during this whole COVID shutdown, is working on my scrapbook. But
we all feel guilty about that, Kathy.
Just a little.
All right. Julie and Mindy, we'll see you next week.
Sounds great.
Bye. All right.
Bye.
We'll talk to you later. We're so happy you joined us today. You can find the show notes for this episode at midlifematterspodcast.com. Also, please tell a friend about the show and help them hit the free subscribe button on their favorite podcast app. Be sure to follow us on Instagram at Midlife Matters Podcast. That's where we post pictures and stories about all the things we talk about in each episode. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.